Back to Focal Point AFR Talk, coming to you from our remote studio live from the Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. The network is AFR Talk. And I'm pleased and honored, delighted to have with me in studio as a live guest. Dan Gainor has been a frequent guest on Focal Point by phone. Dan, great to meet you in person and great to have you here in the remote studio for Focal Point.
Yeah, this is fantastic. It's a fantastic event, and it gives us a chance to talk in person instead of via social media.
Well, you work with the Media Research Center, and tell us, for our listening audience that may have not heard us talk before, what the MRC is really all about.
Well, this is an important year to really understand that. The Media Research Center, run by Brent Bozell, and if you watch television ever, you've seen my boss somewhere, is 25 years old this year. Our 25th anniversary gala is coming up later this month. The Media Research Center is out to provide a check and a balance against the liberal media. And when you say liberal media, it's not just what you think. It's not just, the ABC, CBS, and NBC, but it is the major newspapers. It's the entertainment media, which frankly, these days are almost more propagandistic than the news. And that's really saying something. I refer to the mainstream media as the mainstream media because I think there is a mean streak in them. They're vicious and coming after conservatives. And they're just ministers of propaganda. That's the expression I use, ministers of propaganda, typically for the political left. The only thing I would say is they're not mainstream. That's the reason why we try to, we'll talk about the traditional media, and frankly, we do a lot with the non-traditional online media, a lot of the lefty publications and things like that. But if you were to suddenly take all the journalistic jobs in the country, and I include myself in that, and replace the people with just ordinary Americans, you'd see this tidal shift in the news, because 42%, according to Gallup, 42% of Americans are conservative. Only 21% are self-identified as liberal. But you look at the news media, and it's overwhelmingly
And
liberal.
It would seem, Dan, it would seem that if you've got twice as many Americans self-identify as conservatives as liberals, but all they see on the alphabet networks and the CNBCs and the CNNs is a left-leaning political point of view, then it's easy for them, if they don't have somebody like MRC watching out for this, easy for them to think that that's where the vast majority of Americans are, and that's just simply not true.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw it big time with Chick-fil-A just recently. What happens when ordinary Americans feel like, wait a second, we've been pushed too far. We're actually going to speak out right now. And they spoke with their wallets and they spoke with their hearts. But if you were to look at the media analysis of that, I mean, it's completely different. They were running clips of protesters. The night this happened, I think it was NBC that ran 5 little clips of protests. There were what, a couple hundred protesters around the country, a couple 100,000 people going to Chick-fil-A, above and beyond what ordinarily would happen. If you apply those same rules to your average liberal protest, well, then of course conservatives actually appear on television. But that's what happens. You end up with things like the March for Life, which is extremely important, and it gets ignored by the major media all the time.
And a very valuable resource for those of you that are in a listening audience, newsbusters.org. I'm on that website every single day. MRC TV prepares a lot of clips that we use here on this program, doing an absolutely invaluable service, providing a check and balance. We have checks and balances in our system of government, and we need it in the media. And MRC, Media Research Center with Brent Bozell and my good friend Dan Gainor providing that kind of balance. And Dan, let's talk just for a minute. We've seen this Middle East kind of in flames. I mean, there's a map on the Guardian, London Guardian, a worldwide map of where all of these protests are breaking out. Our embassies are being burned. The flag of Al-Qaeda has been raised over our embassy in Tunisia. Just read that before we came on the air. Mitt Romney coming out with, I thought, was a pretty strong and vigorous criticism of how weak the president's response had been, the embassy's apology for the video, which it turns out this thing is not about that film at all. We'll talk about that later in the program. But as you look at how the media has responded to this Middle East crisis, to what Mitt Romney's had to say compared to what Barack Obama's had to say, have they been even, or is their coverage been tilted? And how?
Overwhelming. I mean, just outlandishly pro-Obama on this. The fact that if Mitt Romney had done anything other than saying Barack Obama is 100% right and we should all just follow his lead, that the media were all set up to criticize him. And you've got people, actually journalists conspiring. And when I say conspiring, I mean operating, behind the scenes, trying to spin the news together, operating in concert. One of the journalists from NPR and another journalist plotting the questions they were going to ask to try to trap Mitt Romney. Of course, one of the NPR journalists was the same one who also came out and said he will not stand for the Pledge of Allegiance at a Mitt Romney event. This is what we get from our, and I love this, taxpayer-funded media. Mm-hmm. But across the board, yes, Mitt Romney gave you a strong statement because most Americans want to think when people were trying to kill, actually are killing our citizens, are killing an ambassador who really risked life and limb helping, make Libya safe from a dictator, that we would do something. When people invade our embassies, it's certainly my personal opinion that once you attack an embassy, our guys should be allowed to shoot back. And that's the word. It's attack. It's not, they just came onto our embassy property. No, you look at that. That's a riot. And that's, they're armed and, they're able to do violence and kill people.
Rob, let's grab clip number 5. I want to play one clip for you, Dan, if we can. It's the one about the NBC chief foreign correspondent. And I don't have his name here on the rundown, Dan, but this is an NBC chief foreign correspondent who basically goes after Obama because of what's going on in the Middle East. And, of course, President Obama was taking credit for the Arab Spring. He inspired it. He was the role model. They were taking after him. Now it seems to me he's saying, Egypt's not an ally and enemy. So he's trying to say, I didn't build that. The Arab Spring, I didn't build that. But here, I want you to listen to this because this is an NBC foreign correspondent. And let's listen to what he has to say. And, Dan, I want to get your take on this. Is the media are their eyes starting to open to the reality of Barack Obama and Islam? Let's listen.
Yeah, I almost had to sit down when I heard that. For the last 40 years, the United States has had two main allies, Arab allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. The other ally in the Middle East being Israel. So for the president to come out and say, well, he's not exactly sure if Egypt is an ally anymore, but it's not an enemy, that is a significant change in the perspective of Washington toward this country, the biggest country in the Arab world. It makes one wonder, well, was it worth it? Was it worth supporting the Arab Spring, supporting the demonstrations here in Tahrir Square, when now in Tahrir Square there are clashes going on behind me right in front of the U.S. Embassy, and you can see now tear gas being fired into a crowd of demonstrators who are trying to get close to the U.S. Embassy, which is at the end of that street, and throw rocks at the U.S. Embassy.
So, Dan, what do you think? I mean, are things now getting so bad that even the mainstream media's eyes are beginning to open up, or is this just an aberration?
Well, it's an aberration based on circumstance. What you find a lot of times for is if they're on site, they actually will cover what's going on. They may not cover all of what's going on, but I mean, he's watching riots in Egypt. And yes, I disagree with his timeline. Egypt wasn't our ally 40 years ago, but that goes back a little too far. But, he's right that we've built Egypt to have, you could argue, certainly one of the best militaries in the Middle East. If they've shifted from being a friend of the United States and conversely, at least friendly to Israel, to not a friend of the United States, well, where do you think they land with Israel? They are right on the border. Israel fought several wars with Egypt before. This is not a good development. Our troops are being attacked all over the place. Our embassies are being attacked. And yes, this is standard operating procedure for radical Islam. And the media don't like to remind you that. But when you do anything, and I mean anything that we in the West take for granted as, freedom, religious speech, free speech, and say something, Christians in this country get mocked and bashed all the time. GCB, the ABC show, if you did GCM, you'd have a jihad, or GMB, or I guess it is. That is the reality. Cartoonists get attacked. There's a riot. There was a woman who was involved in Drone Muhammad Day on Facebook, and
She had in hiding.
Yeah, she had to go into hiding.
Adopt a pseudonym and everything. Well, Dan, one last thing before I let you go. I want to talk with you just in the last couple of minutes about the kind of shake that athletes get in the media, Christian athletes. We saw this with Lolo Jones. Now, she did some questionable poses. Our listening audience is familiar with that, but she was a self-identified born-again Christian. She was abstinent. She was saving herself for marriage. Just got absolutely ridiculed and hammered by the media. And you guys have done some stuff to try to bring some balance to how Christian conservative athletes are covered.
Well, yeah, what we did, we looked at even certainly more than her, Tim Tebow. It's the beginning of football season. You got to look at how Tim Tebow has been covered. And the atrocity of the coverage of Tebow, or young Gabby Douglas, another Olympian, 16 years old. Salon magazine came out and criticized her as being so into Jesus, like that's wrong. And Lolo Jones was criticized as, one of the reasons she was criticized is being a fan of Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow, I think one of the publications called him an affable stimpleton because he's a Christian. We can't have that. And I'm sure you'll see following up because Robert Griffin III, who went to Baylor and is new quarterback for the Redskins, after his first touchdown pass, he gave the sign of the cross and pointed heavenward. I guarantee you if he keeps doing that, the media will go after him as well. This is a strategy that they want to not chase. Their idea on the left, and the media reflect this, is they don't believe in freedom of religion. They believe in freedom from religion, and they want to chase anybody's faith, particularly Christian faith, from the public square in all forms.
My guest has been Dan Gainor. He's a vice president with the Media Research Center, also the organization that sponsors Newsbusters. Great website, newsbusters.org. They monitor bias in the liberal media and kind of a target-rich environment.
But I've been told it's full employment. But I'll say this: I would gladly sacrifice my job today if it meant the media were going to be neutral tomorrow.
Oh boy, wouldn't that be sweet? Dan Gainor been my guest from Media Research Center. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate the work you guys do. I'm on your websites every single day. Couldn't do this show without the information I get from you guys, so thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. We couldn't do what we do if it weren't for radio hosts like you.
Dan Gainor, Media Research Center. We'll be right back in just 2 minutes. Stay with us. You're listening to Focal Point on AFR Talk, coming to you live from the Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C. Brian Fisher is my name. Program Focal Point. Network is AFR Talk. Back in 2 minutes. Stay with us.